We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Daled Amud Aleph and Meseches Avodah Zara. This is Avodah Zarah Daf 64a. On the previous Amud of Nachman said that a Jew can be paid to break barrels of yayin nesach, and the reason is because it's limu'ute es hatifla. In order to minimize the amount of impropriety, we're breaking the yayin nesach, so that is a good thing, even though the Jewish person is being paid to do this. And the Gemara is now in the middle of bringing support for Rav Nachman from a brisa. So the brisa is talking about digging with kilayim. You're not allowed to dig together with an idolater in the kilayim that's in the field with the prohibited mixtures. However, the brisa says avol okrin imo, but one is allowed to be paid to uproot the kilayim with him, and the same reason is given kedei lemu'ute es hatifla, in order to minimize the impropriety. And Rashi explains avol okrin lahashlichon leibud, if you want to uproot the kilayim in order to destroy it, that's okay. V'afagav de rotza b'kiyuman shelo yakrom me'alein ad sheyakrom hu. Again, even though he really wants the kilayim to be there, he doesn't want it to be uprooted on its own because he wants to be the one to uproot it because he's getting paid for this. But still, the brisa says it is permitted, and this seems to be like Rav Nachman. And the Gemara continues and elaborates on the proof to Rav Nachman from this brisa. Savrua, right now we think, Hamoni Reb Yekiva. Who's the author of this brisa? It's Reb Yekiva. The Amar HaMekayim b'kilayim loker. Reb Yekiva says that if somebody maintains kilayim, he gets malchus. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, HaMenachesh v'HaMechape b'kilayim loker. If somebody is pulling out the weeds, or if somebody is covering by kilayim, that the person gets malchus, that is prohibited. Reb Yekiva says, Af HaMekayim, even somebody who maintains kilayim gets malchus. My time, what's the reason of Rabbi Akiva? What's the reason of Rabbi Akiva? Amar Krutz, because the pasuk says Sodcha lo sizra kilayim. It says you can't plant in your field kilayim. You can't plant the prohibited mixtures in your field. Ainli ala zoreya. Now I only know that it's prohibited to plant. Mekayim inayin. How do we know it's prohibited to maintain it? Talmud lomar. The pasuk says lo kilayim. It says no kilayim. You're not even allowed to maintain kilayim. V'ilu lemu'ute tifla shari. And so therefore, what we're saying is that Rabbi Akiva, who says maintaining kilayim is problematic, but if what you're doing is maintaining it because ultimately you're going to be minimizing the impropriety, so then it would be permitted, and again, that would be a proof to Rav Nachman. And the Gemara says it's not necessarily a proof to Rav Nachman. Lo, no, hamani rabbanan here. It could be that this brisa is actually following the rabbanan, that mekayim b'kilayim, that maintaining kilayim is not a problem, and if mekayim kilayim is not a problem, so then certainly it's going to be okay to uproot it. That would not be any problem at all. It wouldn't be any proof to Rav Nachman at all. But the Gemara says, I rabbanan, but one second, if you're going to say the brisa is the rabbanan, my irya okrin, why does the brisa tell us you're allowed to uproot? Afilo kiyume nami shaper dami, even to maintain the kilayim is permitted. That would have been a greater chiddush, and so that's what the brisa should have said. And the Gemara continues and answers, Hacha b'mayaskin, and here what are we dealing with? Kagon to ka'avid b'chinam. Actually, the brisa is not talking about someone who's getting paid. The brisa is talking about somebody who's actually working for free, and therefore the brisa of Rabbi Yehuda, the brisa is following the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. The Amar litein lohem matnas chinam aser. In general, Rabbi Yehuda says to give to the idolaters gifts that are free is usually prohibited. It would usually be problematic. And so therefore we say that that's true, that it's problematic, but if the person is doing it for free, but it's limu'ute es hatifla, it's minimizing the impropriety, it's the uprooting of kilayim, then it is actually permitted. But the Gemara still says, Mid Rabbi Yehuda nishmal Rabbi Akiva, but from Rabbi Yehuda, can't we understand what Rabbi Akiva would say? Lav amar Rabbi Yehuda asur litein lahem matnas chinam. Doesn't Rabbi Yehuda say that it's forbidden to give them a free gift? Avol limu'ute tifla shaper dami, but if it's minimizing the impropriety, then it is permitted. So we could say the same thing for Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva nami, according to Rabbi Akiva as well, afagav da'am Rabbi Akiva hamekayim b'kilayim loke, even though Rabbi Akiva says to maintain kilayim is prohibited, and one who maintains kilayim gets malchus, lemu'ute tifla shaper dami, but if it's to minimize the impropriety, it would be okay. And the Gemara says, v'sulo midi, nothing further needs to be said, meaning to say this is in fact a support for Rav Nachman. And Rashi explains, Savrua haide katani okrin, right now we think when the brisa says you're allowed to uproot the kilayim, afilu Rabbi Akiva, it's following even Rabbi Akiva. The Amar HaMekayim b'kilayim loka, who says that to maintain kilayim, the person gets malchus. What does that mean? Dim zoran acher, let's say somebody else planted the kilayim, uvazev v'asal lahen siyog v'geder kedei l'kayman. Let's say this person comes along and he makes a fence in order to maintain it. So according to Rabbi Akiva loka, he gets malchus. Alma asr lios rotza b'kiyum. And you see, according to Rabbi Akiva, it is forbidden to be in a position where you want to maintain the kilayim, and yet again l'mu'ute es hatifla seems to be permitted. And the Gemara brought the brisa with Rabbi Akiva, hamenach hamenachesh v'hamechape, one who weeds and one who covers. Means to say la'achar zriyas, and that means to say after they're planted, the kilayim is planted, chofa afar alei, and he covers it over with dirt, kederech kol hazorim, like everybody does who plants. And Rashi continues, loke by menachesh and mechape, the person is going to get malchus, dahainu nami zoreya, that's the same as planting. The madarko shal zoreya letzamuche per mechavin, just like by zoreya, by planting, the person is having intention that the fruit should grow. Hanami letzmuche per mechavin, so to here it's the same intention. And Rashi continues, Talmud lomar lo kilayim, the pasuk says no kilayim, that means you can't even maintain. We'll take a look at the full pasuk. The full pasuk is eschukosai tishmoru behemtecha lo sarbia kilayim. It talks about the animal, they can't be mixtures also. And then it says sadcha lo sizra kilayim, you can't plant your field as kilayim. And so Rashi explains kilayim deharva kadarsh, we're darshaning the kilayim that is said by animals. Midasamach kilayim de lo sarbia gabe sada, from the fact that the word sada is right near the word kilayim over there. Essentially we're reading it as kilayim sad chalo. You can't have any kilayim in your field. Darshinan, as Rashi says, kilayim sad chalo, we darshan it as kilayim sad chalo. Midalo ksiv, from the fact that it's not written in the pasuk, behem techalo sarbia kilayim velo sizra sadcha kilayim. It doesn't say in the same formulation, behem techalo sarbia kilayim and then lo sizra sadcha kilayim. Rather it says behem techalo sarbia kilayim and then sadcha lo sizra kilayim. It says it in the reverse. Shma mina, you see from there, sadcha kilayim de la'el nami darshinan, that the word sadcha goes on the word kilayim before. Umashma demazir akasav shaloyu kilayim besada, and therefore it sounds like the pasuk is warning us not to have any kilayim in the field, even to maintain. V'ilu okrin shari, but apparently it's when one is uprooting it, it's permitted lemu'ute tifla, because there you're minimizing the impropriety. Afagav derotz b'kuman achi yakram hu v'yitol scharu, even though he wants the kilayim to be there until he actually uproots it, so that he can take his wages. And then the Gemara said, no, maybe it's the Rabbanan here, it's really the Rabbanan. Dolo ichpis lui rotze b'kuman, because the Rabbanan don't care if you maintain it. Avol yein nesach, but it could be that by yayin nesach, the aser, there it would be prohibited lios rotze b'kuman. It's prohibited to maintain it over there, to want it to be maintained. The Yisrael mitzuva levatel avodas kochavim b'tash mishel, the Jew is going to be commanded to nullify, to get rid of all Avodah Zara. Emor lach aser, so there I might say that it is aser. And Rashi continues, umay ir ya'okrin, but if that's the case, why does the Brisa say a case of uprooting? It should just be a case of maintaining. Mida itzrich lemishrei okrin, from the fact that it needs to say it's permitted to uproot. Mashma dorotzi kiyuman demiyot tiflu shari. It sounds like it's only in this situation where you're minimizing the impropriety that it's permitted. Avol kiyum gomer aser, but to actually maintain it would be forbidden. V'i rabbanan afilo kiyum nami shari, but if this is the Rabbanan, they hold that to maintain it is permitted. And Rashi continues, Liolam Rabbanan, he really the Brisa is the Rabbanan, v'hai de itzrich lemishrei okrin, and the reason why the Brisa needs to permit uprooting the kilayim, la mishum isur rotze b'kiyuma, it's not because it's forbidden to maintain it, el mishum isur matnas chinam, rather the reason is because it's prohibited as a free gift, it's prohibited to give a free gift. Rabbi Yehuda, and the Brisa follows Rabbi Yehuda, Damar beparakama, who says in the first parak, asur litain lahem matnas chinam, you can't give to the idolaters a free gift, v'yashmi'inan, and so the Brisa is teaching us the lemute tifla shaper dami, that if it's minimizing the impropriety, then it is permitted. Umakshin, and the Gemara then asks, even if you say that the Brisa is Rabbi Yehuda, mid Rabbi Yehuda deshari iser didei gabe mio tifla, from the fact that Rabbi Yehuda permits his iser when it's minimizing impropriety. So nishmal Rabbi Kiva, we should understand according to Rabbi Kiva the same idea. Deshari nami iser kiyam mishum mio tifla, that he would permit the prohibition of maintaining because of minimizing the impropriety. And then we can have the answer to our question as well. V'gabi nesach nami mishum mio tifla shari by yayin nesach as well. If you're minimizing the impropriety, it would be permitted. And so the Gemara said, V'su leko lak shuyei midi. Therefore, there's nothing further to ask, and the matter is concluded. And the Gemara continues, Hadra Yasvi v'kami boilahu. Then they were sitting again, and they were asking the following question. This is the same four Amoraim that were mentioned on the previous Amud. And they asked the following question. Demei avodas kochavim biyad ovid kochavim ma'u. Let's say you have the money of Avodah Zara in the hands of an ovid kochavim, meaning to say, an ovid kochavim, an idolater, he sells his Avodah Zara and he gets money. So what's the halach in terms of the money? Is the prohibition transferred to the money or not? Mitofeses domeh biyad ovid kochavim. Although, do we say that the money, the prohibition transfers to the money in the possession of an Ovid Kochavim or not? We do say that if it was a Jewish individual. The question is whether we say that by an Ovid Kochavim. And the Gemara says, Amar Lahu Rav Nachman said to them, Mistabra demei avodas kochavim biyad Ovid Kochavim mutar. And it makes sense to say that the money of Avodah Zara in the hands of an Ovid Kochavim is permitted. Midahanu da'asu l'kame de Rabba bar Avua, from those who came before Rabba bar Avua, meaning to say these were talking about Ovdei Kochavim, who came before Rabba bar Avu in order to convert. Amar Lu, he said to them, Zilu Zavinu Kolma de Isluchu, go and sell everything that you have, including your Avodah Zara. Vesuis Gairu, and then you'll convert after that. And my time, what's the reason he gave them that advice? Mishum de Kosavar, isn't it because he holds Demei Avodas Kochavim Biad Ovid Kochavim Mutarin, that the money of Avodah Zara in the hands of Ovid Kochavim are actually mutter. In other words, the idea is sell all of your Avodah Zara, and if you sell it while you are still in Ovid Kochavim before you convert, so then the money you receive will be permitted, and then you'll convert after that. Doesn't that prove that this is the case? But the Gemara says not necessarily. V'dil mashani hasa, maybe it's different over there. To kevon de daitil igure, since he wants to convert vadai batla, he certainly nullified the Avodah Zara, so it doesn't even really have the status of Avodah Zara. And so maybe it's different in that situation. And so the Gemara says, Ela mehacha, rather you can bring a proof from here. This is from the following brisa. The brisa says, Yisrael shayanosha ba'ovid kochavim moneh. Let's say the Jew is a creditor. The Ovid Kochavim owes him a moneh. Umocher avodas kochavim. And let's say the Ovid Kochavim sells his Avodah Zara to pay him the money. Or Yein Nesech v'hevilo, he sells his Yain Nesech and he brings him the money. Mutter, that is permitted, he can take that money. Avolim Amar lo, but if he says to him, meaning if the Ovid Kochavim says to the Jew, Hamtein li, at she'emkor avodas kochavim, wait for me until I sell the Avodah Zara, v'avilach, and I'll bring you your money. Yein Nesech v'avilach, wait for me to sell the Yain Nesech and I'll bring you your money. Also, so then it's prohibited. And so you do see from here a proof that again, the money from the Avodah Zara is permitted when it's in the possession of the Ovid Kochavim. That's why he's able to pay off the debt. The question just is, why in the Seifa? Why in the case where he says, Hamtein li, wait for me, is that a problem? That's the Gemara's next question. Ma'ishna Reishu, Ma'ishna Seifa, what's the difference that in the first part of the brisa it's permitted, but in the end case of the brisa it is prohibited? And the Gemara explains the end case of the brisa. Amar Rav Sheshes says, Seifa mishum dehavale ki rotze b'kiyumo. The reason why in the end it's prohibited is because now at this point, if he actually tells the Jewish creditor, wait for me until I sell the Avodah Zara, so the Jewish creditor is actually like a rotze b'kiyumo. He wants the Avodah Zara to remain intact so that it can be sold, so he will be paid, and that is problematic. The Gemara says, V'chi rotze b'kiyumo ki agavne miyaser, but if you have a situation of rotze b'kiyumo in such a scenario, is that really prohibited? But we learned in a Mishnah, this is a Mishnah in Demai, Ger v'ovid kochavim sheyorshu avihen ovid kochavim. Let's say you have two brothers, a ger, one of the brothers is a ger, a convert, and one of them is an ovid kochavim. He's an idolater, he's not Jewish, and they're inheriting from their father who's an ovid kochavim, who's not Jewish. And so the ger wants to make sure that he gets everything that's not Avodah Zara, and that his brother, who's still an ovid kochavim, gets the Avodah Zara. So the Mishnah says, Ger yachol lomar lo, the ger can say to his brother, Tolata avodas kochavim, you take the Avodah Zara, v'ani mos, I'll take the money. Tolata yein nesech, you take the yain nesech, v'ani peiros, and I'll take the produce. However, im mishabol rishos hager, but if it already comes into the possession of the convert, then it's already prohibited, because then it's considered like he's getting benefit from the Avodah Zara if he splits it in that fashion. But in any case, you see that if the ger says to his brother, the Ovid Kochavim, you take the Avodah Zara and I'll take money, even though that's sort of rotze b'kiyumo, he wants the Avodah Zara to be intact so that they can make this division. Apparently, that's not a problem of rotze b'kiyumo. The Gemara says it's not necessarily a proof to that. Amar Rava Barula says, Masnisin ba'avodas kochavim hamischalekes lefi shavoreha. The Mishnah is talking about Avodah Zara where he wants to divide it in this fashion, but he doesn't actually care that it's maintained, because it's the kind of Avodah Zara, even if it breaks apart, it's going to have that same value. It's, let's say it's gold or it's silver, it's still going to have value, and therefore he's not rotze b'kiyumo in this case. The Gemara says, Teinach avodas kochavim. Well, that can explain by Avodah Zara, you can say he doesn't care. But Yain Nesech, what are you going to say by barrels of Yain Nesech? He certainly wants that to be maintained. The Gemara says to that, Becheres Hadraini, we're talking here about barrels that are earthenware, Hadrianic earthenware vessels, that within the walls of the vessels is this wine, so he doesn't care if it breaks, because the idea is you're still going to be able to get that wine out of the walls of the vessel. But the Gemara still says, 1 second, Valo rotze b'kiyumo, but still he's considered to be, that he wants it to be maintained, in the sense that Shelo Yignovu, V'Shelo Yovedu, even if he doesn't care if the item breaks, but he doesn't want it to get stolen, he doesn't want it to get lost, and so therefore, again, it still is a proof that if it's rotze b'kiyumo in this fashion, that is not a problem. But the Gemara says, Elamar Apapa, rather Apapa says, Yerushas Hager Ko'amrit, are you trying to bring a proof from a Mishnah, which is dealing with inheritance of a convert? Shani Yerushas Hager, it's different by inheritance of a convert. The Akilu Barabbanan, there the Rabbanan are more lenient, even though normally rotze b'kiyumo in this fashion would be a problem. Here it is not a problem, because we have a decree, maybe the convert's going to go back to his corrupt ways, we want to make it easy for him to convert, so over here we're more lenient than we would be in other scenarios. And Rashi explains, again, the Gemara said, we're talking about Avodah Zara, hamischalekes lefi shevareh. We're talking about Avodah Zara, that even if it's broken, it can be divided up, it will still retain its value. Shel zav o shel kesef, meaning it's made of gold or silver, shem tishaver, let's say it does break, yachlekua l'shvarim, delo ichbis leger b'shvi rasa, so you'll be able to divide it up as broken pieces, it still will have the value. The convert doesn't care if it breaks. But the Gemara then said, Yei nesech ma'ikul, what are you going to say by Yei nesech? Havada im yishtaber yovid, there, certainly if it breaks, it's going to be a loss. Katani tolatah yayin vani peros, and over there also he says, you take the wine, I take the produce. Isn't that a situation of rotza b'kiyumo? And the Gemara then said, becheres hadraini, well, maybe we're talking about hadrianic earthenware vessels. Delo ichbeslan, he doesn't care at all if it breaks. The hayayin bolua b'socha, because the wine actually is absorbed within it. Upoto kishashoreo b'mayim, when you soak it in water, the wine comes out, and that's why over there he doesn't care. But then the Gemara said, still he does care because he doesn't want it to get stolen, he doesn't want it to get lost. And the Gemara ultimately said, you can't bring a proof from Yerusha Sager, because there we are lenient, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Dalid Amud Beis.